Right. This is Rapid Prototyping. I'm Kent Reese. Here we go. So here's a little bit about me. As you know, I am Kent. I am an alum, not a current student. I work here in Rochester at a company called Second Avenue Learning. Thank you, Eddie. I appreciate you, Eddie. I love it. Thank you, Eddie. I sure like making games, and that link would send you to my portfolio when you go through these slides again, taking notes, because that's what you should do, because these slides will be on ritgamedev.club, or is that still our URL?
Yeah. It still is. We got to update our site still, but
okay.
When you said that we need to use Git for it, I think that kind of clicked for us, so we're gonna mess with it.
Okay. But I'm a known cryptid, as you can see here in this photo. I'm right beside my brother there, so you can kind of see the similarities. But yeah, I make games for a living. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of wild. I think it's pretty cool that you can do that. And I'm going to talk about that today. And specifically, how do you make games quick? And how do I make games quick? So here are the 4 stages of small-scale game development. And I'm going to go into depth in each of these. Basically, I think of game development over a short period of time as always being in these kind of 4 stages, right? So you have the initial idea, which is typically the smallest part or one of the smaller parts. And it's just like, you know, that grain of inspiration you get. And then like you're making the thing, and that takes majority of the time, like vast majority. You're communicating with your teammates, you're developing on the project, you're polishing, whatever. And then adjustment is kind of like the iteration loop that's going into the making of the thing, right? So while you're making the thing, you're adjusting it. And then you go back to making the thing, and then you go back to adjusting. And then you ship when it's done, or when you're not allowed to continue the loop anymore. And shipping is one of the smaller, but one of the hardest parts of any project, even projects on a micro scale. Like releasing anything is difficult. So that's the quick summary. Here's the long summary. Oh, and then you do it again and again. So here is the slide on initial idea, coming up with ideas. And here are a few strategies that I like to use when I'm either having to come up with a concept for a game, or I have to iterate on a concept that has been given to me. So typically when you're at a game jam, you're going to be given a prompt of some kind, whether that's a one-word theme, whether that's like the goal of the jam, or like an overarching mission statement. So like I know in game jams past, we have had one-word like themes for jams that have worked pretty well. But you know, one word isn't enough to start a game. And if you don't know where to start, these are some pretty good ways to build upon those ideas. So the first one is probably the most obvious one, relational ideas. Think of things that are related to the thing, right? It's the most obvious way to build on a game. But I think something that people don't really like think about when they're coming up with these ideas is how those relations build into the game, right? how are you going to reflect the relationship between the two concepts? That's really the core of the idea, right? That's really what we want when we are thinking about making games. And then the next approach that I like is the learning approach. Learning approach kind of just puts the theme aside and says, okay, I have this thing that I really want to learn, and I'm just going to use this game jam as an avenue to learn it. So say you wanted to learn more about procedural generation or artificial intelligence or any other system, narrative device, basically anything you could imagine you wanting to learn. You're putting that at the forefront and you're saying, I'm going to retrofit the theme into this, right? So for example, when we had the secret game jam, I know that there was a team that had really wanted to try and get some procedural generation in there, right? And they were focused primarily on learning that aspect of game development. And then the secret part kind of was hooked into the process of them learning that technique. It was still a core part of their game, and it was still a very impressive game. But what they were there for was to learn, right? And then the next two are kind of the more like getting to like more formal ways of thinking about coming up with ideas. So there's these genre of tools called oblique strategies. Originally, they were made for musicians. So there was a musician, Brian Eno, who came up with these cards that basically just have like these evocative phrases on them. And then he would look at them and build concepts for albums based off of that. Similar sort of thing. Like something is printed on a card, you draw from a deck, you see what it is, and if you want to work with it, work with it. If you don't like it, toss it, draw another card. So anything that's kind of like that, like an idea generator, deck of cards, I like to call that an oblique strategy. It's just using another pre-made source to help give you some creative inspiration. And it can really help if you are just not having any ideas at the moment. And another technique I really like, especially in team projects, is free association, which is just like saying, okay, I'm going to say like the first like sentence that comes to my mind, and then you build off of that, and we keep going back and forth, building this concept until we say things that, you know, like, oh, I really like that. Let's do something with that. And you kind of build off of that dynamic that you're building, and you're saying like, oh, well, we have all these phrases that we want to put into the game. Let's, you know, see how they're related and come up with a concept to pursue. And yeah, most of these don't take very long, but it's really important to go into your prototype knowing at least a few core tenets of what you want to build, rather than going in just buck wild, seeing what's going to happen. Because if you have a few constraints on yourself going in, you're going to come out with a much stronger product at the end, a much stronger voiced thing, something that really, or something that could potentially be really like impactful and like grounded. Like you knew what you were doing, and you had a sense of direction and focus, and you could build off of that rather than kind of just being in the ether of like, oh, I don't know what I want to do. So those are just some strategies for coming up with ideas. There are millions, and whatever works for you, but these are just a few that I have found work with me and the way that I think about games. But I feel like they're just nice things to keep in mind when you're coming up with concepts. All right, so moving on from the idea into actually making the thing, prototyping. There's a lot of steps to a prototype. You have an idea, but is that idea any good? So if the jam has the time to permit for this, I would highly recommend doing it. Just trying a few different prototyping methods out. So what you should try to do is just, well, the number one prototyping thing I always try to do is this first bulletin point here. Attempt to write down a few core rules of your game and try to envision like the approach of an implementation, right? You don't have to write down every single little thing that defines the game's existence. Some game designers will tell you that. I think that's bad advice, because then you're getting caught up on like really technical details really early on. You might as well already be programming the game at that point, in my opinion. If you have a few core rules that establish what your game's about and how you want it to be played, that's a much better starting point for when you're going into development, right? So you have a stronger idea of not only concept, but of like, okay, here are some rules of how this game is played. Then something that I have been doing at Second Avenue, and I have a few resources here tonight about, is paper prototypes. Making paper prototypes and playing them to just see how it feels to play, see what the mechanics are like, see where your ideas fall short. They're pretty good at that, and they don't require a lot of time to set up. You just need to have a rule set. You need to have some tokens, basically, to represent the different parts of your game. And you need to just walk through and play it, talking about what you're doing while you're doing it. And another thing I really like to do in the prototype phase, or, well, this is just prototyping, but this in the early prototype phase, is just to tell someone about your concept, talk through it, hear what they have to say about it, see if they have any ideas that they could incorporate into your concept, right? So something I've done a lot of times in game jams is just talk it out with my partner, say like, hey, I'm thinking of like doing some cool stuff with like attaching yourself to a wall and jumping off of it. And they'll be like, oh, but like, what if we had like a rocket effect on that? Or like, what if instead of jumping from wall to wall, you had to climb up the wall every single time, get to the floor, and only then could you reattach yourself to a wall? Or like some sort of like idea for a mechanic, some sort of idea for a unique feature, right? So those kind of interplays can really add a lot to your concept. So here's a slide dedicated to paper prototypes. So this text is actually directly from Second Avenue's internal resources on paper prototyping, why we do paper prototyping and the approach we give on paper prototyping. So the first part, why we do it, is pretty straightforward. We want to understand the game and its mechanics before we actually develop it. Actually going through and doing the paper prototype is a bit more complicated. first you have to recreate the game with pen and paper, and then you're sitting down and you're walking through it with each other, and you talk out loud what you're doing and how you're doing it, and you're checking with the rules as you're going through, and you're doing things. And when you do something that's against the rules, you explain why you wanted to do that thing and why you thought that was something that you could do. And it's more to just see, like, how are the systems of this game working? How are we as game designers looking towards this game and saying, are we doing the best job? Are our mechanics like really clunky and unintuitive to a person who hasn't actually played the game yet? And you kind of just want to get an overall vibe of the game at this point. When you run through the paper prototype, you're like, okay, I can kind of see the direction this is going. Is this like a meditative, like super strategic experience? Is this like an action-packed sort of game? Is this a narrative game? Is this like, what kind of thing am I making here? And paper prototypes really get you to a late stage of development early. That's really kind of the magic of paper prototypes, is that without actually having to go in and implement the entire game, you could get a pretty solid sense of how the game will feel when you get to that point. So yeah, I strongly recommend paper prototypes. I've used them in work. And if you have the time and resources to do it, I strongly recommend you do. Now getting into actual development, the actual development of the prototype. We're actually sitting down, we're coding. Here are just a few guidelines. I'll just go through them briefly. Focus on finish. You get to a point where a feature is done. Don't worry about it after that. If you want to go back and revisit it later at the end of the jam when you have time, do it. But you should focus on getting the game done as fast as possible. When you're in a rapid prototyping situation, that is the one aspect, the rapid aspect. So you want to focus on finish, not on perfect. Communicate. Talk to whoever you're working with, if you are working with someone. If you're working by yourself, organize is the word that replaces communicate. So you establish in clear and certain terms the work that needs done and who is doing it. Nothing on a game beyond like a single person effort gets done if you do not have that. You need to establish what is in front of you and everything that needs done. And when you do that, a lot of the times you can see ahead and say like, oh, wait, that's going to take way too long. We only have 48 hours and it will take us 96 hours to do something like that, right? So it's a good way to not only effectively utilize development time, but also foresee any potential snags and blockers and things that will be problems down the line, that if you hadn't gone through the process of like blocking out these things, it would be a big problem once you finally got there. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. Pretty self-explanatory. When you're making a rapid prototype, you are not making a commercial game. Don't try to make a commercial game in 48 hours. That's the best advice I can give you. You want to focus on delivering a very good first impression, because if you have a bad first impression, most of the people who play your game are not going to have a good impression of it. And that's really the focus here, is that first, I know it says 10 to 20 minutes, but like I would say the first 1 minute, like those are the key critical minutes. You want to pour a lot of your effort into making sure that your game is easy to pick up and easy to get an impression of very quickly. Put everything interesting that you're doing in those first minutes. Do not hesitate, because it's a game jam game. It's not a commercial game. If it was a commercial game, pacing out is very important. It's a game jam game. Pacing is on a micro scale, not on a macro scale. And then this is specifically advice for rapid prototyping. Act, don't think. When you're developing under a tight schedule, you should be thinking through, the consequences of your code, what it's doing, but do not over-engineer something that you are going to only be working on for 48 hours at most. You can go back and you can re-engineer something that you think is interesting and that you want to use in a later project. But during the jam, if your focus is on finishing, you need to be able to just take a few sacrifices and say, like, I'm going to cut the corner here and I'm just going to act, and I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to leave it alone. All right, so play testing. If you have the time to play test, lots of jams you're developing until the last minute. So this sometimes applies, this sometimes doesn't apply. Depends on how well you executed on the previous parts. But if you're playtesting your game, playtesting is a very precise art, right? So when you have a playtest by yourself, you're looking for certain things. When you're observing other people playing your game, you're observing different things. Because, the experience of us as game designers is we know our games, we know how we're supposed to play them. And, if we play through our game and we're like, yep, seems intuitive to me, it's probably not. It's definitely not. You've got to sit down with a person who has fresh eyes and see what they react to in your game and see how they play it and see if what you think is the intended way is the way that people actually approach your game. Because if those are the same, great, you've accomplished your duty as a game designer. You've done better than most game designers, including myself. I'm terrible at gauging how people will actually react to a situation in a game. But you're asking these questions to yourself and you're taking note and you're adjusting based off of this information. Because if people play your game in a way that you don't think they should, but is also interesting, your game is dictating where it wants to go, not you. So you need to see like how people react to your game, and you need to adjust to how people react. You do not adjust to how you want them to react. If people are abusing a mechanic, oftentimes I see designers really want to optimize out the fun of a game. So like if people are, shooting rockets at their feet to get over tall obstacles that they shouldn't be getting over at this point in the game, well, your game is fun because you can shoot rockets at your feet. It's not fun because your platforming mechanics that you wanted them to use are there, right? So you need to focus on the, rockets at the feet thing, not the platforming mechanics you held so dearly to your heart up until this point. Like that's just a quick example I can think of. But think about the impression you leave, think about the experience the playtesters are having, and adjust accordingly. Then when you're playing by yourself, you're looking for completely different things. You're more acting as a quality assurance engineer. You already know how the game is supposed to be played. You already know, like, from point A to point B, everything there really is to know about the scenario. What you're trying to do is see, like, okay, how can this break? How can I use the systems I've made and break this in a way that's not good? So you're just testing, basically, when you're playtesting by yourself. You're just seeing, are there any game-breaking bugs? Is it going to crash when I do these things? So the lessons you learn from playtesting by yourself versus observing other people are radically different. And that nuance, I think, is lost on a lot of, like, really new game designers, where they'll play their game and they'll think, yes, I've made the game and it works perfectly. Not necessarily. Just because you played your own game does not mean that the game is working as perfectly as intended as you think it is. Other people and how they react are crucial to that. All right, adjusting. So you see these things, you see how people react, you see things that will crash your game, you see all sorts of horrors of the game development world. What do we do about it? Well, in this sort of environment, we ask ourselves some questions very quickly to see where we place certain things on priority. Like, if this game has just something that completely breaks it, and if we ship it, it will just completely die, and we have the resources and time to fix it before we get to that point, then you should fix it. But if it's something that's either not important to the experience as a whole, something that you couldn't reasonably fix, something that is not as important as something else, or something you don't have time for, it's not really worth going through and trying to fix it. You should absolutely take note of it. You should look into it more after the fact, and you should take it as a lesson. If you see something that just is an insurmountable challenge, do not throw yourself at it. Do not throw yourself at it fruitlessly, right? You only have this set amount of time for a game jam or for a rapid prototyping session. And that time is reserved and is precious, and you should not be wasting it trying to solve things that may or may not actually affect the goals that you have going into this. And shipping. Shipping is something that I feel like a lot of game jam games are just not good at, because when you're shipping a game jam game, it's typically in the last 30 minutes. The deadline's very soon. You don't have a lot of time. You haven't, even really put a lot of thought or consideration into what it will look like when you ship it. But shipping is probably the most important thing in a game jam. It determines a lot about how people judge your game. So on the left here, we have a game that I posted, and on the right here, we have a game someone else posted for the same game jam. So the game on the left, which is mine, is not a good ship. Like, it's out there, you can download it, you can play it, but it's not, it doesn't really leave, like, this page does not leave an impression of the game. It's a single screenshot of a couple of blocks that don't really translate into anything. It's hard to see like what exactly is going on with this game. On the right, we have a game that has one really good presentation, logo at the top, nice visual touches on the sides, nice palette, easy to read text, really well formatted, a video showing the gameplay. I do not have to download the game or install it or anything. I can just look at that video and I can see, what is this gameplay about? There are more clear screenshots. There are multiple screenshots to show me different parts of the game, different parts of the scenario that I might not have seen from just one. And all of this builds a better impression for a judge or for a person looking at your game, wanting to rate it for like a global game jam or for a Ludum Dare. Like, this is, I would say, like pretty good practice to have. You want to pay attention to these details because they are important, because they matter. They make your game stand out. If people see your game, know what it's about, they're much more likely to take the leap to download and play it. That's just the facts of it. So these are a few notes on the process of making games that are born under punches. You will improve with time and your process will change. The process I've talked to you about here is not the process you are going to have necessarily. You should take everything I've said here not so much as like hard, definitive gospel rules, but more like guidelines, right? You don't have to just always be doing these things. These are more just like, okay, I want to keep these things in mind in order to focus on finishing the game. And what works for me might not work for you. We are different game designers. We are different people. We have different design sensibilities. We have different things we value in a game. We have different things that make us the game designers we are, right? And so the methods I've described to you today here are not necessarily the methods that you personally as a game designer need to hear. And another point that I really want to hammer home is that like this kind of development style, this kind of like high pressure, like intense crunch 48-hour game jam games, you should only be doing that if you want to do that. That is not something that you should be doing on a long-term project. It is just not sustainable to do on a macro scale. It will net you results in the short term, but it will really hurt you in the long term if you approach game development like you approach a game jam. And the scale really makes a huge difference in how we should approach developing games. But that's another talk for another time on large-scale game development. That's not what I'm trying to talk about here. I'm just saying what applies to one doesn't necessarily apply to the other. And finally, have fun. Game jams should be fun. If you are not having fun, that is a sign that something has gone really wrong at the game jam. If you are too focused on like trying to get this thing that you've been working on as a weekend project, like perfect and done and like the best thing, and you've put like so much into it and you're just like not having a good time, you're kind of missing the point of the game jam, which is it's more like a practice session. It's more like, something we do as game designers to flex our muscles, but to have a good time doing it. So yeah, you should have fun when you're making games. So this is Aiden. He is a designer and game dev at a local studio called Aesthetician Labs. But more importantly, Aiden is a huge advocate and practitioner of rapid prototyping. Way back in the year 2017, Aiden was making a ton of different prototypes, and I was playing most, if not all of them. And I was talking to him one time about the process of making these things. And I asked him how he made like so many different games so quickly. He had made like 7 in 7 weeks. And he told me up front that he made all these games in 1 hour. And that's a whole nother level of micro game development. And he said, yeah, every Saturday I participate in 1 hour game jam. So I then participated in 1 hour game jam. And these are 4 games I've made for 1 hour game jam. And I'm going to go through them. I'm going to give you a little case study on each. And we're just going to see what my experience is in the 1 hour game jam taught me in terms of rapid prototyping and what it can do. So this was the first 1 hour game jam submission. It was called Pumpkin Quest. It's not a very good game. It's kind of an infinite runner, but also not. It has an end, and it's okay. It's not the best thing in the world, but it is a game that I made in an hour. So pretty good, all things considered. When I was making it, I remember being really stressed and like really unsure of whether I could like meet the deadline. And I got it done. This wasn't my first 1 hour game jam. This was my first submission. I failed to submit, I believe, 2 times before this. I failed to meet the deadline. But after practicing those 2 times, taking those lessons and seeing like what I was capable of, I was able to come back and sit down and make this. So here's a few lessons. Getting something lesser done is better than having a better idea incomplete. Again, not my first attempt at this. It's better to have submitted a okay or mediocre game than it was to work on and end up missing the deadline on a much better one. 2, you have the skills you need to make a game. It's very intimidating, and it's probably not the game that you're going to want to have made. You're probably going to be pretty disappointed with the game that initially comes out. But that is the first step in becoming a game designer that makes the kind of games that you're satisfied with, is to make games that you aren't satisfied with. And then the whole fail fast, rapid prototyping makes you fail faster. So the real big benefit of a game jam and of rapid prototyping is that the stakes are very low. You aren't putting thousands of dollars or time or like tons and tons of effort into these things. It's more low stakes, low investment, but you can learn a ton about game development, about what your sensibilities as a designer are, and how you can improve. So this was my next, well, not really my next, but this is the next 1 hour game jam submission, which is called Meet Me in a Dream. And for this one, I just kind of had the theme for the game jam was dream. So I just had had an idea that was kind of weird based off of a dream I had, where like I heard these voices and I was in this field and I was like chasing the voices, but like I couldn't catch any of them. And that's pretty much what the game is. It's you're just roaming around this field, chasing these voices, and then randomly the game will just end. Like you'll wake up. And so, don't know how much of a game it really is, but it is a really cool experience, and it's something satisfying to have made because, I had this vision for it. I was able to do it. It was 1-to-1, right? And so, like, here are some lessons I took away from that game. So games are art, and you can express a complex idea pretty quickly and effectively. And practicing making games makes you better at making them, which seems obvious, but it does mean that like you should practice. You should do these game jams and you should become better at making games. And iterating on top of that is important, right? After reflecting on Pumpkin Quest, on the scale Pumpkin Quest was, and like seeing what I could do, it was easier to go back and say like, okay, here is a concept that I think is very good and I can do in this amount of time. All right, third game, Don't Stop Colors. It's basically a Mario Party mini game, and it's very clear on what the game is. It's a territorial control game. You play as the white circle, and you try to get as much of the area as you can. And, it's a fun little mini game. And this was the first submission that I had that quote unquote won the jam. And to win the jam, all you need to do is have the guy who live streams all the entries say that it was his favorite. And I did that, which I was pretty proud of myself because I hadn't done that before. So, lessons. It's possible to make a good game quickly. More on iteration. Iterating makes your skills stronger. It's the best tool to make your skills stronger. And experimenting is fun, and you can lead to mechanics that you might not have expected. This game is based off of a glitch that happens in this C++ engine I wrote, where the draw function like overlaps the image if there's no background, right? So I used that as a mechanic rather than just writing it off as a weird bug. So thinking about things and how you can use them to your advantage, things that you might have written off as just mistakes, that can be a big part of your toolkit when you're making a game. Then final thing is Void. So Void was originally made for the 1 hour game jam, and it's rather large scale for 1 hour. It's 10, so the original submission was 10 one-screen levels where you're around in this void, and it's a platformer, right? And you have to basically shoot projectiles and move around to see even like where the environment is and how you're supposed to navigate. And that's kind of like the puzzle platformer part of it. And I really, really liked it enough to where I expanded this game and I released it as a full game. You can buy it. It's on itch, not on Steam, but it's still something I did. It's still a fully fleshed out and realized game. So, lessons here. Etching out the core of a larger experience can be fast. Not necessarily fast, but it can be. Void was 40 levels when it was released. It was 10 levels after the jam, many of which I expanded in the final game. Making something polished is possible. It requires a lot of experience in knowing your limitations and using those limitations to your advantage, but you can do it. And working under those tight constraints really can help you find that voice of yours, that thing that makes you a unique game designer, right? Like your calling cards, your sense of aesthetics, your sense of gameplay, like going through this process and making games helps you find that faster. And successes are as big as you make them. While failures and blunders and mistakes don't cost you much because it's a low risk environment, this is a rather proportionally high reward environment because you can translate all the knowledge and all the effort you put into a game jam game into a full scale release. So using your successes and leveraging them is huge and gives you something that you otherwise wouldn't have if you hadn't done rapid prototyping, if you hadn't done the game jam. Finally, some homework. It's not much, but it is homework. I want everyone here to participate in a game jam. It'll teach you something valuable about your skills as a designer. And I want you to focus on the effort. Learning here is what is important. Yes, I want you to finish your game, but I want you to learn. I want you to sit down and say, I want to learn how to make games. And game jams won't hurt you, I promise. They are a lot of fun. It is super cool to sit down with your best buds for 48 hours and see what kind of weird things you make in that time. There's something really cool about the game jam experience. And here's some final takeaways. Just summary of what we've talked about here in these case studies, right? Rapid prototyping. Help you find your personal voice and creative talent as a designer. You can feel out the core of a minimal viable product for a project pretty quickly, iterate quickly. Failures are low risk, successes high reward, and you can leverage those successes to wherever you feel you need them. And here I have a quote from Noah Ratcliffe, who is also a game developer at Esthetician Labs, talking about how they used rapid prototyping to create and get experiences out the door as quickly as they could because they were working under some tight deadlines. So that's it. Have a good one. Your homework is to go to a game jam, and I want to see your games. I do not post on the Discord, but I always look. I am a lurker. If you at me, I will say something, but otherwise, I am typically pretty hands-off. I want you to show me your games, even if you think they're bad. even if you think that like you didn't do what you wanted to do, I want to see it, and I want to see how you approach making a game, and I want to see that you had fun. So that's pretty much my talk. Thank you all. It's been huge pleasure to give this talk and to share this information with y'all. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And it is almost 8 o'clock. When's the homework due? Whenever I decide. I will post in the Discord one day and I will say the homework is due. What have you done? No, the homework is, let's say November. November is when the homework is due. Does anyone have any questions, any things they want to talk to me about? Doesn't have to be rapid prototyping, but it does have to be game development. Okay, so we have some questions in the chat here. What's your opinion of play testing after paper prototyping and before the development in rapid prototyping? Feel like that could help catching errors in game balance or finalize the scope, but I don't know if that time spent is worth it. I guess really the answer to that question is how. How are you play testing your game before you've started developing it? The paper prototype is before you have touched code. And play testing, at least to me, means that you're play testing a build of some kind, right? So yes, you should be play testing while you are working on the game. Like this should be an iterative approach, right? So like if you work on the game, you play test, work on the game more, I feel like that's pretty big. And I feel like that's really helpful to do. But I'm not entirely sure about the scope of your question. What challenges should we expect when doing game jams individually and with a team? All right. There's a lot. There's a lot of challenges you should expect. In terms of individually, a lot of the roadblocks have to do with scope and with your limitations on what you can do as a single person, right? So if I wanted to make a music-based game, that's going to be very challenging for me because I am not a musician, I'm not a composer, I'm not good at making audio, I'm not an audio designer. And I don't really know the first thing about doing that kind of stuff, right? So the answer is always, it depends, but you have to look at the factors of the game itself, the jam itself, and what you can do and what your skill set is. And basically gearing yourself towards making a game that puts your strong skills first and foremost and kind of brushes aside everything else. As far as doing teams, so far as doing like team stuff, team dynamics are huge. The biggest problem is miscommunication, really. Not being clear on what you mean or what the task really is. That's pretty big. Team dynamics can be pretty rough if you get into a team with people that just don't really work together very well. That can be a downer, but as far as like challenges you consistently find with teams, a lot of directorial tension. So if you do a team, you should probably designate one person as your like director, the guy who like you default to when things aren't clear. You say like, okay, so how are we going to do this? I feel like organizing, communicating, like those two steps, organizing the project and communicating what needs to be done are the best ways to avoid conflict and a lot of tribulations that typically come with teams. All right. So when I said playtesting after a paper proto, I meant asking questions to give people for feedbacks. Yes, you should be doing that when you paper prototype. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear or if I left it out, but yes, you should be asking questions to the people that you're playing the paper prototype with. You should be getting feedback. You should be adjusting there. Yes. What programs do you personally find yourself using for game jams? Also, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you, Audrey. As far as programs go, I'm kind of a unique case in that I have my own game engine that I have made, and that's typically what I end up using because I really like using it because it's mine and it's my sandbox, and that's how it goes. But in terms of like tools that I would recommend, Unreal or Unity are pretty good. Godot, I strongly recommend Godot. I've found that is probably my favorite of like a boxed and ready engine to just go in and play around with. I know that Godot isn't super popular, but it's on the rise and more people are making resources for it. So you'll, I feel like most people would have a pretty good time using Godot. But anyway, the next question is, how do you find / get your art assets for a game jam? Very good question. Do you make any open art, etc.? Open game art is a great place to start. If they don't really have anything that you're looking for, make it yourself. Excuse me, geez. A lot of the graphics that I make for my games, I just open up MS Paint and I get to it. Doesn't have to be anything necessarily fancy, but you want to try and keep things aesthetically cohesive, right? Just do some, like just learning some basic color theory goes a long way. Learning some basic composition, like just learning the basics of how to do art can really give you a leg up there. But yeah, as far as art assets, open game art and making it myself. I typically do some combination. Kenny is also very good. Kenny assets, as William has just pointed out, Kenny assets just are incredible. Yes, they are. They're very good to study. Shout outs to another Godot appreciator. And all right. Any other questions? I'll give it a minute because because if there is one, it's probably being typed.
I have a question.
All right. I want to hear your question.
Would you rather fight a gorilla that's very large or a bunch of small baby-sized gorillas?
Baby-sized gorillas. That's a very easy question. A
Wow.
normal-sized gorilla would mess me up. So the only chance I have is against the many baby gorillas.
But think about the moral dilemma of betraying your hairy sons.
No.
You wouldn't punt a baby gorilla.
Oh, I absolutely would.
How many gorillas are there, the baby ones?
Enough to equal the mass of the Kong Lord.
Its weight in adult gorilla.
Yeah, I'm still going with the baby gorillas.
Patrick, you're right. You could make a game out of it. Somebody
You-
could rapidly prototype that
Yeah,
game.
someone could.
Speaking of
Someone
rapid prototyping, tomorrow, Jumpstart, check it out. That's basically half of rapid prototyping right there.
Tomorrow? That's in 2 days.
It's in 2
Today-
days. Time is an
Today is
illusion.
Thursday.
Look,
Tomorrow is Friday, and the
I
day
want
after that is Saturday.
I want it to be Friday so bad. My brain is making me believe.
No,
it's
me
Friday.
too.
Today
I
is
give you
actually
credit for the
Monday.
plug attempt.
Look, Jumpstart
What are-
Saturday. It's on Saturday. You know what it is. You don't have to listen to any other words I say. Just the word Saturday.
You want to tell people what Jumpstart Saturday is?
Yeah.
I'm
I-
very interested.
Yeah, we started it this semester. First Jumpstart Saturday was a couple weeks ago. It's a new event to take the place of our off weeks when we didn't do anything in between game club meetings. And for those of you who haven't attended, I give you a prompt and I give you a format for how I want you to make up a game idea with the prompt. And then we all share our fun little design docs or whatever. I'm still deciding if I want to keep the design doc format week by week or try something new every time. But that's the general format. Is it's guided brainstorming with prompts by yours truly. And then at the end, I point you to some game jams to check out. And also plug our other Saturday event because I'm required to do that as club lead. And also because I also run that one.
Yes.
Last time we
RGDC.
had some really great results, such as Gun Made.
Oh, yeah.
prompt-
I saw the memes and
Did you hear
I
about
only
Gun Made?
I had the out of context experience, but before you give me context, William,
I'm not
Yes.
giving context.
hold on. William,
All right.
yes. RGDC is doing a game jam this semester. We are doing it Halloween weekend, starting on October 29th and ending on October 31st. It will be starting at 7 p.m. on October 29th and ending at 2 p.m. on October 31st. So we're going to be spooky. We're going to try to rent out the labs on Magic. And I may or may not be decorating those labs because it's Halloween. Please remember that it's Halloween and participate in Halloween. We'd love to see it.
There's also going to be candy and prizes potentially if you show up. It'll be a good time.
It is option. So we are doing a hybrid too, which is important to remember. So don't feel pressure to go to the labs if you do not feel comfortable doing so. We will still be hosting online. We will still be following the same formats as our online game jams. We will just be providing the space for in person if people need it or want it.
All right. That sounds pretty fun. Would you happen to need any business cards for that?
You know, Ken, we have been actually in need of some promotional material. We need a new Halloween poster, and we wouldn't mind some nice Halloween business cards to follow it.
And to answer your question, Patrick, this is not written down anywhere yet because we're still working out details of like renting out the space. But once everything's more set in stone, we'll have it probably in one of our many announcement channels. It'll be there.
Probably schedule, since that is a,
No, I would put
Thing.
it, well, I guess it could go there. You're right.
I don't know. I
I think
figure
on schedule.
we might as
It
well
will
use that
probably show
channel,
up in
huh?
announcements, but schedule makes sense because then we could just link it.
Yeah.
Schedule's a good channel. It's my new favorite channel.
But yeah, back to the Jumpstart. Our prompt last time was to give you an idea of what the prompts are. It was a cooking game where none of the ingredients are edible, and we got some fun ones. We got Gun Maid, where you're a maid who poisons all of the food for whoever she's working for. So that was a fun one. A lot of zombie-based ones. Cooking up zombies, fighting zombies, being a zombie. We got some people making chemicals. Love to
There's
eat
a
luncheon.
raccoon
Yeah, there were multiple raccoons, I
with a
believe.
gun.
Yes. A lot of these
Eventually.
characters had guns.
That's beautiful.
It is.
Yeah. And if
That's-
y'all have been working on those games, if you've taken it farther, please show them off on Saturday. It's not tomorrow.
You
It's
could
Saturday.
rapidly prototype them.
Yes.
You
We're
could.
only going to make that joke tonight. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, I stole that.
Yeah, you did steal it.
Shameless.
Yeah, you stole it from me,
Yeah.
mother fudger. But that's fine. That's fine.
You
It's
could
not.
even combine it with Saturday's prompt. Make the ultimate inedible Saturday prompt game.
So I think now is a great time to transfer to our Discord server for potential project sharing. Ken, of course, you are invited.
I will probably not join as I'm still in my office and I would like to go home.
That is completely fair.
But it was nice seeing everyone. It was nice giving the talk. I hope everyone liked it. I hope everyone got something out of it. And I hope that you rapidly prototype. So I guess until next time, see you.
See you guys. See you on the Discord server.